All right, before we get into the discussion with Peyton, which is about the shooting of Rayshard Brooks, just a little bit of an update that came out in the news after we recorded this, but before I got it out onto YouTube. Ex-Atlanta police officer who killed Rayshard Brooks charged with felony murder. So he was charged with murder. I believe at this point there's reports that those officers have now turned themselves into law enforcement, and there were reports that the cop either kicked Rayshard Brooks after he had been shot, or stepped on him or stomped on him. It's not exactly clear exactly what happened. It depends what you read. But apparently there was some type of kicking or pressure applied with the foot or something after Rayshard Brooks had already been shot. This was after he was shot, fatally shot. So, and then they were not administering any kind of health considerations right away. They basically waited well over 2 minutes before seeing to Rayshard Brooks' health, or what may have been left of his health. So that's the reports that have come out since this conversation. So just keep that in mind as you're listening to the conversation. All right, welcome. So we're here today with Peyton Smith from over at the Fourth Radical YouTube channel, and we're going to be discussing Rayshard Brooks. So this has been in the news, a big deal. So this is another situation where we have cops talking to an individual. Early on, if you look at the conversation, it seemed like things were going fine. Things were not going to get out of control. And then at some point, things go bad. There starts to be a struggle. And then Rayshard Brooks is shot in the back running away and then ultimately died. So this is a little bit different than I'm not saying it's justified in any way, but it's a little bit of a different situation than the George Floyd case, because he was, sort of the victim the whole time, right? Someone was on his neck the entire time. Here, people are pointing to different aspects of the interaction and what happened and saying, well, he turned around and pointed the taser at the cops. And I guess my ultimate question was, could this have been done in a way where no one ended up dead, right? That's kind of my bottom line is, yeah, there are definitely actions could have been different by everyone involved, but could these outcomes have been different? And I guess one of the things that strikes me is the two weapons that really escalated things and caused problems in this situation were brought by the police. Right. So the gun that was used to shoot Rayshard Brooks, he didn't bring that. That was brought by the police. And the stun gun or the taser that was used, that was brought by the police. So if those things hadn't even been there in the first place, we probably would be talking to everyone being alive, and this wouldn't even have been in the news. Right. So, So what's your take on things, Peyton?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good point. I hadn't thought about it quite that way. And, when it comes to this whole thing, it really does frustrate me that you see a lot of people out there who just look at this video and they're like, oh, well, the officer was under threat. He was resisting arrest. Therefore, it's okay that he got killed. Look, man, you got to zoom out a little bit. You got to take yourself out of it a little bit and ask yourself, did someone need to die from the fact that someone fell asleep in a Wendy's drive-thru? I mean, it's completely it's just ridiculous. Like, you should look at that on the face and be like, well, something went wrong. Something's clearly wrong here. And you can say, well, he shouldn't have been resisting arrest. Look, man, you got to take that stuff into account. The guy was still clearly drunk. He was still clearly drunk, although, I mean, he was coherent enough to be, sort of talking and was trying to do like a step test or whatever in some of the videos that we saw. But, I mean, he was still drunk. You woke him up from his sleep, and he was offering to walk home. Like, any decent person would be like, hey, man, let me just drive you home. Like if you run into a guy who fell asleep in a drive-thru and a regular person is just taking care of the situation, what would they do? They'd be like, hey, man, like, you seem a little drunk. Can I drive you home? Or can I get you a taxi? Or can I, something like that, instead of trying to hold the guy down. I mean, it's ridiculous what happened. I mean, it's just like this system where it's just like you have no ability to de-escalate a situation.
And while it's true, yeah, you can make the case that, well, he shouldn't be a resisting arrest. But does that bring a death sentence, essentially, right? Is that the right level of retaliation? Because they had the man's car, right? He wasn't going to be driving around in an intoxicated state after that. He was leaving, and they knew who he was. So it's not like you couldn't come back later and pick this individual up
Yeah.
right? He was out there, and they even knew he basically said where he was going to go, right? He
Right.
had
He
people in the
told them
neighborhood.
exactly where he said exactly in the video where he was headed to. So it's like the idea that the officers couldn't then find him. Instead, it was, oh well, we have to detain him now. We have to get him now. And then as soon as that stun gun gets pointed, he just, oh well, let me just shoot him dead. Let me just shoot him down. It's like it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any rational sense why it had to go the way that it went.
Yeah, and watching those videos, one of the things that struck me was when they went to actually arrest him. Right at that point in the conversation, because before that, everything seemed like it was just some guys talking. It wasn't, things weren't getting out of hand. It seems to me like things changed when they went to actually make the arrest. It seems to me like you kind of explain to an individual what's happening. You would kind of say, okay, this is the
Mm.
point at which we're going to take you under arrest. They basically just started grabbing him and putting his hands behind his back, which I guess is a way that they do things. But a lot of people, there's a reaction that happens when you just start grabbing someone's arms, putting their arms behind their back without even explaining to them what's happening, that they're being arrested, what they're being arrested for. I mean, they kind of went in with, we think you've had too much to drink, and all of a sudden his arms are getting yanked behind his back. That throws a lot of people off, right? I've seen altercations not involving cops that started for less than that. It throws people off a little bit. It seems like there would be a way in which you could, if a person is being perfectly reasonable and having a conversation, like you could lead into that arrest with maybe a little bit more explanation and warning, so at least the individual understands completely what is going down at that point without
Yeah.
having to necessarily like physically move him.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, the officer was just suddenly like, "All right, I think you've had too much to drink." Starts yanking his arms behind his back and starts handcuffing him. That's not going to de-escalate anything. That's going to get people more likely to be upset. And you can be like, "Oh, well, you have to obey the law." It's like, well, come on, man. Like, you also have to be reasonable with how people are. But going back to the point of you could have just driven him home. Why is it the case? Look, I get that like you can't have people driving around in the case of a DUI, but when it comes to a DUI, why can't you just be like, hey, get in the back of the car, we're going to take you home and write it up. It'll be written up as a citation because, you can't have people who are like repeat
Right.
offender DUIs. Like at some point, you've got to, there has to be some kind of program, some kind of process to make sure that someone's not a threat, someone's not a danger. I mean, look, I had a friend who almost got into a very serious accident from someone who was drunk under the influence, and it could have been very, very bad. It could have been very, very terrible. But I do think that the way in which we handle DUIs in this country doesn't always make the most sense because when someone's drunk behind the wheel, you can pull them over, and it's quite clear. Hey, look, let me take you home. Let me take care of this, and you can write it up. When you're dealing with people who are drunk under some kind of intoxication, maybe they were high or something like that. Dealing with it, the kind of force of, okay, well, we're going to handcuff you, right? Doesn't always
Right.
make a whole lot of sense. I mean, you're dealing with someone who's not in a completely stable or sane, mental state, or I might say normal mental state. So why even is there a need to grab handcuffs? I'm not entirely sure
Right.
why you need to use handcuffs to get someone because they're drunk. I don't understand why there was even a need to use handcuffs.
It falls into one of these aspects of policing that I think definitely is worth looking at and asking, what is this really necessary? I mean, most police cars now have a cage, so it's not like if you're in the back seat, you're going to start grabbing the cops in the front seat or anything
Exactly.
like
Right.
that. Like what
And they
exactly?
can't get out, right? It's not like they can just
Right.
open a door. So it's not entirely clear that you need to have their hands like tied behind their back every single time you make an arrest. I mean, okay, well,
Right.
we're going to use handcuffs. I mean, at some point it seems like a lot of it's just symbolic playing, right? It's a game. That's
Right,
just how
and it's
we
just kind of
arrest.
this like exerting power, right? I mean, I think you get a few different types of people, it seems like, that get attracted to being police officers, and I think some people get into being police officers for the exact right reasons, but it also seems like one of those professions that is going to attract people for the wrong reasons, right? You get the kind of the high school bully or the sociopath that wants to exert power over other people. That's the perfect job to go into so that you can just get that high from being powerful over people all day long. And it seems like maybe a different approach could maybe, if they had politely asked him to get in the back seat, and maybe things could have gone very differently. And maybe he wouldn't have gotten the back seat, and things could have also gone bad. But it just seems like the escalation here, it was like an invitation to escalate.
Right, exactly. And I do think, like, when it comes to police officers, you're talking about, okay, well, you don't want to create a job which incentivizes a certain kind of people to get that job. Absolutely true. I mean, that's the case, though, in just about any industry. You look at, politicians, in the media, et cetera, et cetera. We also need to think, though, about the roles in which we play and how the roles which we engage in influence our own behavior and then lead us to then justify our own behavior through some kind of retroactive justification. I mean, you look at, a lot of the research in psychology, especially in the past 15 years, this idea of, that there's a stable character trait of individuals, that there's, like a virtue or something of the sort, has really been undermined, which is a really interesting discovery about how unstable we are as people. We like to think that, oh, well, there's a certain kind of consistency, but that doesn't really seem to be the case. You put people in one role and they'll be very, very kind. You put people in another role and they'll become incredibly mean. So it really is it's the task of society to build a place where as many people as possible are in a role in which we can learn to be good, and then can, kind of come to a kind of cognition of moral virtue.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Peyton, for discussing that conversation. Good talk about Rayshard Brooks. Thanks for joining us. Make sure to head over and check out the Fourth Radical YouTube channel, and give Peyton some attention. Very good videos over there. Thanks again, Peyton.
I appreciate it. See you guys.
All right. And we'll see everybody later.